What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and it's been a while since we took a look at the Abzan Amalia combo for the Pioneer format. This is the last deck list that we actually have, going a perfect 10-0 in the Pioneer Challenge and taking it down all the way back in June. The deck in a way has made some small changes to the main deck, and I think it's kind of debated on kind of what some of those changes are anyway, or how you actually build the deck, which has been kind of sweet and refreshing in a way for some of these other creature combo decks, because like in Yawgmoth, like when I played that deck in Modern, there was some flex spots and everything like that, but for the most part the main configuration of the deck kind of stayed the same. Made some minor changes kind of throughout as we got more cards added to the card pool and more sets came out and whatnot. But Abzan Amalia combo definitely has, definitely builds that trend towards being a mid-range deck, towards more focusing on the combo, playing certain cards, not playing certain cards. So we're going to take a look at this deck list and kind of go over some of those changes as well that people have been opting to make at this time as I'm recording this video. But of course, before we get too deep into the deck, if you want to see more videos from me where I talk a lot about the Modern and Pioneer format, along with some other longer form / discussion type videos, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. And it is also a free and easy way to support me and my content as we try to push for 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, which we are on the fast track to do so because y'all are awesome. We're building a sweet community over here, so go ahead, be a part of it, subscribe, all that great stuff. So Abzan Amalia combo, real quickly for like the uninitiated, is based around the namesake card Amalia Benavides Aguirre, which is a white and a black 2/2 with Ward 3. It is a legendary creature, and whenever you gain life, Amalia explores, and then you destroy all other creatures with powers exactly 20. Pair this with an inconspicuous / former standard staple Wildgrowth Walker, which says that whenever a creature explores, you get a +1/+1 counter on the Wildgrowth Walker, and you gain 3 life, meaning that as long as you have a way to gain life or initially explore, if there's a Wildgrowth Walker and Amalia on the battlefield, they're going to trigger back and forth until Amalia explores enough cards to the top of your library that are non-land cards, or I guess explores non-land cards, until it reaches 20 power, and then it's going to destroy all the creatures, destroying the Wildgrowth Walker, thus ending the loop, and you are stuck with a 20+ power Amalia. Depending on how many other life gain triggers you had after the fact, it is possible for Amalia to get over 20 power, still trigger and whatnot, and it can happen, especially if you have multiples of the creatures like Lunarch Veteran and the Prosperous Innkeeper that all say when another creature enters battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. It's easy to find like multiple copies of these, and get quite a few life gain triggers, and then Amalia just ends up getting a lot more counters and stuff on her. One of the downfalls to this deck is the fact that if your opponent is able to pump Amalia's power past 20 on a turn where it would, or on one of the triggers where it would resolve and whatnot, and it's still over 20, it'll just keep going infinitely, and Wildgrowth Walker's going to keep getting infinitely big, keep triggering until you essentially mill over your whole deck, and then Moto's like, okay, no other game actions can be taken, like this game is going to end in a draw, which is kind of the reason why this deck has a big target on it in terms of, potential bannings, just because turns out people don't like playing 5 or 6 games and not being able to, have an actual conclusion to their match, or at least having to report it as like 1-0-5 feels pretty bad. Hopefully, to avoid some of these things, you are able to, play cards like Dina Soul Steeper, that even if your opponent or even yourself, if you decide to give your own Wildgrowth Walker indestructible via the Selfless Savior, Dina is like a way that when all this is on the battlefield, does 2 things. One, every time that you kind of go through this loop, you're going to gain life, which means that Dina is going to trigger and that each opponent is going to lose 1 life. It gets around, hexproof and whatnot, so Dina is going to be able to drain your opponent completely. The other part of it is the, paying one mana and then sacrificing another creature. You can power up the Dina, so when you attack, if your opponent ends up only being able to block 1, they're kind of dead either way, because if they block the Dina, they take the full damage from the Amalia, and if they block the Amalia, you sack the Amalia and hit with Dina for a ton of power. Also, in a way, too, like you're able to sacrifice, your Wildgrowth Walker to kind of break up this loop if your opponent is, forcing it to go infinite, especially too if you have a removal spell pointed at your Dina, that would then again cause kind of the game to loop infinitely and then not have a way to actually win the game. So this is kind of like a way that in some cases is like a win condition of its own, because you can just play a game where you have like 2 or 3 of these like soul sister type effects, and then you're just playing creature after creature after creature, draining your opponent for 2-3 life every time that you play a creature, on top of, you know, potentially getting some explore triggers from Amalia, and just being able to kind of put up this like weird offense where you're playing like some of these smaller creatures and your opponent, you know, is not able to get to the board fast enough maybe to block them, remove them. Like using removal on them feels bad because, again, you just kind of backdoor into this combo, and if they, you know, use the removal spells on like the combo pieces, they're still getting beat down by these small creatures, and they're losing a considerable amount of life for each one being played thanks to Dina. Some of the other things kind of going on with this deck, you have Extraction Specialist, Sentinel and Nameless City, Skyclave Apparition. Sentinel and Nameless City allows you to play a pretty good mid-range kind of style, where as a 3-mana 3/4 is pretty big, and it's going to enter the battlefield and create a map token. You pair these with like Wild Growth Walkers, and you're just able to kind of get this nice little value thing going where you explore with the Sentinel thanks to the map tokens. You know, Wild Growth Walkers are definitely going to at least get big, and then potentially Sentinel and Nameless City is going to get big. It's going to be able to keep attacking. You're going to be able to eventually attack with the Wild Growth Walkers because they're going to be 3/5s and 4/6s. They're going to outsize mostly whatever your opponents are playing, outside of like maybe a handful of creatures in the format at most. And that's going to allow you to put the beat down on. You're gaining a ton of life thanks to the Wild Growth Walker triggers, also meaning that it's going to be a lot harder for your opponent to beat you down and win those racing situations when you're able to play offense and defense with the Sentinel. You're able to make map tokens, which means you're able to explore, also meaning that Wild Growth Walkers at the very minimum are going to get bigger and then gain you some life as well. Some of the other kind of like flex type creatures, we have Deep Cavern Bat is like a way to interact with your opponent. Also has lifelink, which can, again, like when it attacks and connects with your opponent or maybe one of your opponent's creatures, then you're going to be able to explore with the Amalia, which then could trigger Wild Growth Walker and so on. So that's kind of where we'd see some of these like flex spots where you'd see a fluctuating number of like Sentinel, the Nameless City. You see a fluctuating number of like Extraction Specialists, usually like 1 to 2, 1 Skyclave Apparition. Decks nowadays are playing Ruthless Lawbringer as like a way to kind of get rid of other things at the cost of, you know, sacrificing another creature, which is a little bit more okay in this deck because you are playing something like Extraction Specialist, so you can like sacrifice a Deep Cavern Bat, give your opponent back their card, blow something up, and then play an Extraction Specialist, get back the Deep Cavern Bat, and just kind of, you know, reestablish like control of your opponent. Like it gets to look at their hand, take a card that's going to be problematic for you out of their hand, and kind of put them in a pretty bad spot. Going forward too, you have some other ways of making the deck very consistent. You have cards like Lively Dirge, which is new from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. The Ruthless Lawbringer, excuse me, is also from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, but this one in particular is very good. So for 1 and a black, you can either pay an additional 1, search your library for a card, search your library for a card, put it in your graveyard, then shuffle. This works decently well with something like an Extraction Specialist because you're able to then just for 3 mana, put something into your graveyard like an Amalia or a Wild Growth Walker, and then play a Extraction Specialist and go get it back. The bigger thing with this card is the fact for 4 total mana, you can return up to 2 creatures with mana value total 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it doesn't work like the green, like the Havoc Festival or whatever the heck it's called in the Mono Green decks, where you can put like 2 5-cost things into play, you know, and then you have like 10 converted mana cost total. This only allows you to have 4 total costs between the 2 cards. So conveniently enough, for 4 mana, you can get back an Amalia and a Wild Growth Walker, and then if you have like a life gain creature in play, then you can trigger it and then start triggering this loop. If you have, you know, just the Amalia in play, you can go get a life gain creature plus a Wild Growth Walker. Any combination of these cards work. Even getting something like a Sentinel of the Nameless City or an Extraction Specialist, like even this, like getting Extraction Specialist and a Selfless Savior or like a Lunarch Veteran, and then the Extraction Specialist goes and gets Amalia, which means that then you can gain life and you can start triggering and whatnot. is also very good. So there's like definitely a combination of creatures that are very powerful to get with Lively Dirge, on top of the fact if you just get to 5 mana, which is reasonable considering the amount of exploring that you're able to do in this deck, and like the amount that you're playing like 22 lands with a bunch of different ways to explore. You can just pay like 5 mana, go get a creature from your graveyard, and just kind of, again, go through the combinations of creatures that you can get with Lively Dirge. So that's just a pretty good addition to the deck, which means that the deck's kind of moved away from Return to the Ranks, which is one of the cards that you could be looking for as you're kind of exploring with Amalia and doing your kind of infinite combo, along with Aetherflux Reservoir being another win condition. This card kind of sucks if you were playing it, you know, as a 4 mana, like put it onto the battlefield, and then you're just planning on casting spells to kind of gain life until you can kind of go through your combo and whatnot. But, you know, you find this after flipping over a ton of cards with Amalia, you end up gaining, you know, 80 to 100 life, and then you're able to pay 50 and deal 50 damage to your opponent. This is like another layer of protection to where if your 20 power creature is not good enough to win the game, they're able to remove it, whatever the case may be. Aetherflux Reservoir is like a nice backup plan, along with like Return to the Ranks, just being a way that we can get back a lot of these other creatures. Again, you're going to be finding a ton of lands with Amalia more than likely. So even if you combo like on turn 3 or turn 4, you're able to play this and get back at least 2 to 3 creatures, and that's enough to kind of reestablish your combo. Of course, if it's later in the game too, Return to the Ranks is going to be able to return 4, 5, 6 creatures, and you're able to either muster up like a pretty effective like beatdown plan where you're going to be able to go kind of wide, or again set up kind of like this Dina plus a ton of life gain creatures to just kind of drain your opponent out. And you totally can do that with enough Prosperous Innkeepers and Lunarch Veterans mixed with a Dina. You're able to completely just drain your opponent out from like those positions. Further, you know, consistency of the deck, you have Court of Calling and you have Collected Company. Collected Company a little bit worse because you're not going to be able to choose the one that you want, and of course Court of Calling is just a little bit more expensive, meaning if you want to get a 2-cost thing you have to have 5 mana, but you can convoke it out with some of your other like cheap creatures and whatnot to make it feel a little bit cheaper. But Court of Calling is going to be able to get exactly what you're looking for, while Collected Company definitely does give you that kind of like spiky chance where, you know, if you have the 2 things that you are missing in that top 6 cards, you're able to do it at instant speed and get both of them onto the battlefield at the same time, potentially on your opponent's end step, meaning that you can just combo, find whatever you're looking for, try to attack with Amalia with them being tapped out, or force them to have an answer for the Amalia to then slam the Aetherflux Reservoir and kill them that way. You can do kind of the same thing with Court of Calling, but it's a little bit more face-up. Collected Company is definitely a way that you can kind of get back in the game after your opponent potentially plays like a board wipe or, you know, plays multiple removal spells, while Court of Calling definitely is better when you're already kind of set up in that situation where you're just missing one key piece. This allows you to go and search for that key piece no matter what, and you don't have to play kind of this lottery that Collected Company kind of forces you to play. The mana base, you have a single Boseiju and you have a Takenuma in your deck. I really like the Takenuma in this deck in particular, just because, again, it's something that you can kind of do with like your extra mana, and with like an Amalia in play, it does get a little bit cheaper. Really only with Amalia does it end up getting cheaper, but even doing this for 4 mana is totally fine. Aside from that, you have 4 Mana Confluence as like mana fixing at the cost of a little bit of life. You have Blooming Marshes, you have Overgrown Tomb, Razorverge Thicket, and the Temple Gardens as well. These decks in particular, they used to play some of the white-black lands that we'd see like Godless Shrine and whatnot, and Concealed Courtyard, but definitely moving away, playing a more focused build on the green aspect of the deck. Of course, like triple green for like Court of Calling, and then of course your Wild Growth Walkers and whatnot, even though having like a pretty good mix of like white and black spells as well. Sideboard, 3 Fatal Push. We have 3 Thoughtseize as well. This kind of allows you to transform a little bit more into a mid-range deck. Kind of the same thing with Liliana the Veil. Like those cards in particular just allow you to play kind of this mid-range strategy, less so on the like combo strategy. You have Tamiyo Safekeeping as a way to give a permanent you control hexproof and indestructible. You're going to gain life as well, which is going to allow you to trigger the Amalia and whatnot. Get Lost is like a catch-all removal spell at the cost of some map tokens. We're really not going to care about it too much. Knight of Dust Shadow for the mirror. Your opponents are going to be able to gain life, and it's going to be a threat that you can kind of pump and sink your mana into. Aven Interrupter is a way that you can get past a Supreme Verdict. You're going to exile the spell. It's going to be plotted, and then your opponent has to pay 2 more to cast their plotted spells or cards from exile. or cards from graveyards or exile, excuse me, not even necessarily plotted. So this is going to allow you to kind of beat a Wrath and then be able to untap and kind of do your thing to end up winning the game that way as well. So just a really neat addition to the deck itself. And of course, another Skyclave Apparition here. And yeah, that's the Amalia combo deck for Pioneer. This is an insane creature combo deck. This is the deck that I would probably look to taking to the regional championship in Washington, D.C. as long as the deck is legal. It's very versatile. You can build it as a mid-range deck, and you can kind of build it as this all-in kind of creature combo deck, and then you can kind of sideboard into both, you know, depending on how you think that the meta is going to kind of play out. And I've been a real big fan of Amalia really since the deck kind of came to be since the release of like Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and I think overall it's been a great deck. It's definitely seeing a lot of play. There's only like 3 or 4 decks that are seeing double digit, you know, plays and, you know, results in the Pioneer format currently. This is one of them, and I think it's probably the best out of the 4 decks that are on there, just because it is like decisive in how it's going to end the game, where really if you're not able to interact with the combo, yes, there is a chance that you could win the game, but you need a lot to go right to be able to beat a 20 plus power creature and then also beat an artifact that is going to end up dealing 50 damage to your face if it ends up getting onto the battlefield for even half of a second. So yeah, that's the Amalia deck. That's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, leave a like on the video. Comment down below what Pioneer deck you would like to see next. Of course, subscribe to my channel and ring notification bell so you know when future videos get posted, where we discuss a lot about the modern Pioneer format and other longer form discussion type videos too. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. I do greatly appreciate it. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.